The great hall of Nexus Prime buzzed with countless voices. 847 different species filled the massive chamber. Some walked on legs, others floated in the air, and a few moved like liquid across the floor. The Galactic Council was in session, and today they would decide the fate of many worlds. Ambassador Li Dong-ho sat in the small human section. His dark suit looked plain next to the colorful robes and metal armor of other delegates. Next to him, Captain Park So-min watched everything with sharp eyes. She wore her Earth military uniform, but many aliens looked at her like she was just decoration. "The humans want more ships again," laughed Counselor Rixtal from his tall platform. His blue skin gleamed under the lights. "They think they can help protect the galaxy with their tiny fleet." Other council members made sounds that might have been laughter. Some species clicked, others buzzed, and the hegemony faction members all made the same hissing noise. Lee kept his face calm, but his hands were tight on his chair arms. "We have proven ourselves in many conflicts," Lee said, standing up. His voice was steady. "Earth forces have helped win battles across 3 sectors." Yes. Rixtal waved, a long arm. "You humans fight well enough, like pets that learn tricks, but real military power needs more than clever tactics. It needs strength, technology, and proper breeding for war." The hegemony members hissed their agreement. They were the strongest military force in the galaxy. Their warriors were born for battle, trained from birth, and equipped with the best weapons. Humans, they believed, were just lucky amateurs. Captain Park shifted in her seat. She had fought those hegemony warriors before. They were strong and fast, but they always did exactly what their training told them to do. In her experience, that could be a weakness. The council moved to other business. Trade routes, mining rights, and border disputes filled the next few hours. Lee and Park listened to everything, taking notes on their small devices. They learned long ago that information was more valuable than gold in galactic politics. Then, something changed. A cold feeling filled the air. Conversation stopped. Even the floating species seemed to hover lower. At the main entrance, a figure appeared that made everyone freeze. Elder Vorthak walked into the chamber. He was old beyond measure, from a species that existed when most others were still learning to make fire. His body looked like twisted metal, but his eyes glowed with ancient knowledge. The Keth Mori rarely came to council meetings anymore. When they did, it meant something important was happening. "Honored Elder," Rixtal said, but his voice was not as confident as before. "We did not expect you today." "Expectation is the luxury of those who live in peace," Vorthak replied. His voice sounded like wind through old caves. "I come with a warning that you will not want to hear." The chamber became completely quiet. Lee noticed that even the air recycling systems seemed to make less noise. Elder Vorthak moved to the center of the chamber. As he walked, small lights appeared in the air around him. They showed star maps, ancient symbols, and pictures that hurt to look at directly. "Long ago, before your species reached the stars, before the hegemony claimed their first world, there was darkness," Vorthak began. "We called them the Endless Swarm. They came from spaces between spaces, hungry for something more precious than flesh or metal. They devoured consciousness itself." Some council members made nervous sounds. Others activated recording devices. The humans just listened. "The swarm returns," Vorthak continued. "My people have seen the signs. Reality grows thin at the galaxy's edge. Soon they will break through, and when they do, all your weapons and armies will mean nothing." "Elder, with respect," Rixtal interrupted. "These are old stories. Myths from before we had proper science. The galaxy is strong now. We have fleets that could destroy entire star systems. You have fleets trained to fight enemies that think like you," Vorthak replied. "The swarm does not think. It hungers. It adapts. It learns from every mind it consumes. Your proud warriors will fall first, because they are predictable." The lights around Vorthak changed, showing battles from long ago. Lee saw images of great ships being torn apart by things that looked like living shadows. He saw entire planets going dark, as something invisible ate the minds of everyone on them. "What do you suggest we do?" asked a delegate from the Crystalline Coalition. Her voice chimed like bells. Look to the humans, Vorthak said. Every eye in the chamber turned to Lee and Park. The two humans suddenly felt very small and very exposed. The humans? Rixtal's voice rose high with disbelief. Elder, have you seen their military? They have a few hundred ships at most. Their soldiers are weak compared to proper warriors. They lose more battles than they win. They lose battles. Vorthak agreed. But they do not lose wars, and when they do lose, they learn. When faced with impossible odds, they find impossible solutions. When every plan fails, they make new plans. When hope seems dead, they create hope from nothing. Lee felt Park tense beside him. This was not the kind of attention they wanted. You speak of adaptation, Vorthak continued. But you mistake repetition for strength. Your warriors do the same things over and over, becoming more perfect at techniques that worked yesterday. Humans do something different every time. They change when change is needed. They break their own rules when rules become chains. This is nonsense, Rixtal declared. Military science requires discipline, proper training, and following proven methods. Chaos is not a strategy. The swarm will agree with you, Vorthak said quietly. They will find your disciplined minds very easy to digest. The elder reached into his robes and pulled out a small crystal. It glowed with soft blue light. This contains star charts and warnings left by my people from the last time. Study it. Prepare. And remember that sometimes the traits you mock in others are the very things that will save you. He placed the crystal on the floor and stepped back. I have done what I can. The choice is yours. With that, Elder Vorthak turned and walked away. The council chamber erupted in noise as soon as he left. Some delegates argued about the warning. Others laughed at the old stories. A few were already calling for more information about these endless swarm creatures. Rixtal called for order. The council will review the elder concerns, but we have real business to attend to. Motion 2847 regarding human military expansion is still on the table. The vote was quick and one-sided. Earth's request for more ships was denied. Their military was restricted to support roles only. The official reason was resource management. But everyone knew the real reason. The galaxy's leaders did not trust humans with real power. As the session ended, Lee walked over and picked up the crystal Vorthak had left behind. It felt warm in his hands. Sir, Park whispered, should we tell them about the deep space sensors picking up anomalies? Not yet, Lee replied, slipping the crystal into his jacket. Let's see what this contains first. Around them, delegates filed out, most of them already forgetting the elder's warning. They had important things to do, trade deals to make, and territories to manage. Old stories about ancient enemies seemed less important than quarterly profit reports. But Lee and Park had learned something valuable today. When the galaxy's most ancient and wise species took time to give a warning, smart people listened. Even if everyone else was laughing, the humans would prepare. They left the chamber together, two representatives of a species that the galaxy considered weak and unimportant. Behind them, the empty chamber echoed with the memory of Elder Vorthak's words. The countdown to something terrible had begun, and almost no one was paying attention. Earth's military command center was buried deep under the mountains of Colorado. General Kim Tae-ho stood before a wall of screens showing star maps, fleet positions, and data streams from across human space. The blue crystal from Elder Vorthak sat on the table beside him, still glowing softly. What have we learned? Kim asked Dr. Yoon Ji-won, who had been studying the crystal for 3 weeks. Dr. Yoon looked tired. Her eyes were red from staring at alien symbols and ancient star charts. The data is incredible, General, and terrifying. This endless swarm isn't just another hostile species, there's something completely different. She activated a holographic display. Strange shapes appeared in the air, twisting in ways that made the human brain hurt to process. They exist partially outside our dimension. When they attack, they don't just destroy bodies or ships, they consume consciousness itself. The victim's mind gets absorbed into the swarm collective. How did previous civilizations fight them? Kim asked. Most didn't fight at all. They just disappeared. Yoon changed the display to show star maps. Look at this. 17 major galactic civilizations over the past million years. All gone without a trace. No ruins, no survivors. Nothing. Just empty systems where thriving worlds used to be. Commander Choi Min-ho entered the room carrying a data pad. He had been testing new fighter designs for the past month. General, the Quantum Link fighters are ready for full trials, but I have to warn you, the neural interface requirements are extreme. Explain, Kim said. The fighters use quantum entanglement for instant communication and coordination, Choi replied. But they need a pilot who can think in multiple directions at once while making split-second decisions. Our computer simulations show that normal military training actually makes pilots worse at using them. Kim frowned. Worse how? Trained pilots try to follow established patterns. The quantum systems respond better to intuitive, unpredictable thinking. The best test results came from civilian volunteers who had no formal flight training at all. Doctor, Yoon looked up from her displays. That matches what I'm seeing in the Elders' data. The few civilizations that survived swarm attacks for any length of time had one thing in common. They abandoned traditional military doctrine and started fighting in completely random ways. Random warfare doesn't sound like a winning strategy, Kim said. Not random exactly, Yoon corrected. Creative. Unpredictable. They stopped following plans and started improvising. The swarm learns by absorbing minds and understanding how enemies think. But if the enemy doesn't think in predictable patterns, the swarm can't adapt as easily, Kim finished. Interesting. What else did these survivors do? Yoon pulled up another display. They used what the data calls hope tactics. When facing impossible odds, instead of retreating or surrendering, they found ways to attack anyway. Even when their situation was hopeless, they kept fighting. The swarm seems to have trouble processing that kind of thinking. A young specialist knocked on the door and entered. General Kim, Specialist Han Yu-jin reporting as ordered. Han was small for a pilot, but Kim had heard impressive things about her test scores. She had broken several simulation records using methods that made no logical sense. Specialist Han, Kim said, we need to test some theories. Are you willing to try something that might be dangerous? Yes, sir, Han replied without hesitation. What kind of dangerous? Commander Choi activated a wall screen showing a complex tactical scenario. This is a simulation of a swarm attack based on the Elders' data. 12 human ships against an enemy force that adapts and learns from every move you make. Standard tactics have a 0% success rate. Han studied the screen for a moment. What if I don't use standard tactics? That's exactly what we want to find out, Kim said. The simulation room was filled with advanced equipment that could create realistic battle scenarios. Han climbed into the pilot's chair and put on the neural interface helmet. Around her, screens came alive with images of space enemy ships and her squadron. Begin simulation, a computer voice announced. Han's 12 ships faced something that looked like a cloud of dark energy. As her fighters approached, the cloud split into hundreds of smaller pieces that moved in impossible ways. They seemed to phase in and out of reality. Han's first instinct was to order her squadron into standard attack formation. But something stopped her. Instead, she told her ships to scatter in random directions. That's not proper tactical deployment, Choi muttered from the observation room. The dark enemy pieces moved to intercept Han's ships, but they seemed confused by the scattered formation. They had adapted to expect certain patterns, but Han wasn't following any pattern at all. All ships, ignore your training, Han said into her communicator. Fire at whatever feels right. Move however you want. Don't think about it, just do it. Her virtual squadron obeyed. The 12 ships began moving in ways that looked completely insane. They spun, dove, and twisted without any coordination. Their weapons fired in directions that seemed random, but it was working. The enemy pieces couldn't predict where the ships would go next because the ships weren't following any plan. Several dark shapes were destroyed by weapons fire they never saw coming. Impossible, Dr. Yoon breathed, watching the displays. She's actually winning. The swarm entities began to adapt, but every time they figured out one ship's pattern, that ship would suddenly change tactics completely. Han ordered her pilots to switch fighting styles every few minutes. One moment they fought like careful snipers, the next like crazy berserkers, then like cowardly runners. "Ship 7, you're surrounded," Han called out. "Copy that," came the reply. "Should I retreat?" "No," Han said, grinning. "Do something stupid." Ship 7 suddenly accelerated directly toward the center of enemy formation, spinning wildly and firing in all directions. The swarm entities had been preparing for a retreat or a careful escape. They weren't ready for a suicidal charge that somehow worked. The simulation ended with all 12 human ships intact and the enemy completely destroyed. In the observation room, the humans stared at the results in amazement. "Run it again," Kim ordered. They ran the simulation 15 more times. Han won 12 of them, lost 2, and achieved a draw in 1. Each time she used completely different tactics. When asked to explain her strategy, she could only shrug. "I just did whatever felt right," she said. "When normal tactics didn't work, I tried abnormal ones. When those stopped working, I tried something else." Dr. Yoon was furiously taking notes. "This confirms the data. Human intuition and adaptability are our best weapons against the swarm. But we need more than one talented pilot. We need to change how we train everyone," Kim realized. "Instead of teaching people to follow orders perfectly, we need to teach them to think for themselves." Commander Choi looked doubtful. "General, that goes against everything we know about military discipline. Chaos in the ranks leads to disaster." "Maybe," Kim said. "But order in the ranks leads to extinction if Elder Vorthak is right. Dr. Yoon, I want you to design new training programs. Teach our people to be unpredictable. Commander Choi, expand the quantum fighter program, and I want both of you to forget everything you know about proper military doctrine." Over the following weeks, Earth's military began to change in secret. Training programs focused on creativity instead of obedience. Pilots learned to trust their instincts over their instruments. Soldiers practiced making decisions without consulting their commanders. Other human colonies received coded messages about Project Tenacity. On New Busan, military engineers began designing ships that could be piloted by gut feeling rather than computer guidance. On Mars, psychologists developed tests to find people who could think in ways that made no logical sense. Not everyone was happy with the changes. Many officers complained that discipline was breaking down. Some pilots crashed during training because they tried maneuvers that were theoretically impossible. But the test results kept improving. Specialist Han became the leader of a new squadron called the Ghost Fleet. Their ships were painted black and equipped with the quantum link systems. Their job was to fight in ways that nobody could predict, not even themselves. "Remember," Han told her pilots during a training briefing, "the moment you start thinking like a soldier, you become easy to kill. Think like an artist, a crazy person, or a child with a toy. Think like anything except a warrior." In the command center, General Kim watched reports coming in from across human space. The galaxy's major powers were still arguing about trade routes and territorial boundaries. They had dismissed Elder Vorthak's warning as the ramblings of an old fool. But deep space sensors were picking up strange readings at the galaxy's edge. Reality seemed to be bending in certain areas. And sometimes, exploration ships sent to investigate those areas simply disappeared without sending any distress signals. "How long do we have?" Kim asked Dr. Yoon. She looked at the data streaming across her screens. "Based on the pattern of disappearances in the Elder's timeline, maybe 6 months, maybe less. Then we'd better hope our crazy new tactics actually work," Kim said, "because when the swarm arrives, we're going to be the only ones ready for them." Outside Earth's atmosphere, construction crews worked around the clock building new ships with unconventional designs. Dr. Seo Jinwoo had been studying dead civilizations for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like the ruins on Kepler 442c. The research station Far Horizon orbited the dead planet, which had once been home to a thriving species called the Mordani. Now it was just empty cities and strange artifacts. "Team 3, report," SEO spoke into his communicator. He was leading the archaeological expedition from the station's main laboratory. "Still finding nothing but empty buildings, Doctor," came the reply from the surface. "No bodies, no signs of struggle, no damage. It's like everyone just vanished in the middle of their daily activities." SEO frowned at the holographic display showing the planet below. 3 billion Mordani had lived. There just 50 years ago, they had been a peaceful, highly intelligent species with advanced technology. Then one day their entire civilization went silent. No distress calls, no explanation, nothing. The research station Far Horizon was small, with only 30 crew members. Most were scientists and archaeologists. A few security guards kept watch, but they didn't expect any trouble. This was supposed to be a simple investigation of an extinct civilization. Engineer Lim Nari entered the laboratory carrying a scanner and a worried expression. "Dr. Seo, we found something strange in the ruins of their capital city. The team wants you to see it." "What kind of strange?" ACO asked. "An artifact that doesn't match anything else we've seen. It's giving off energy readings and it seems to be active." SEO felt a chill run down his spine. Active artifacts from dead civilizations were usually bad news. "Show me the data." Lim activated her scanner display. The readings showed a perfectly spherical object buried under the main temple. It was made of materials that their computers couldn't identify, and it was definitely generating some kind of energy field. "The field strength is increasing," Lim reported. "It's been growing stronger every hour since we found it." "Are the surface teams in any danger?" "We don't think so. But Doctor, there's something else. The artifact seems to respond to our presence. When our people get close to it, the energy readings spike." CO made a decision that would change the fate of the galaxy. "Bring it up to the station. I want to study it in a controlled environment." 2 hours later, the artifact sat in Far Horizon's main laboratory. It was beautiful in a disturbing way, perfectly smooth and black except for symbols that seemed to move when nobody was looking directly at them. The energy readings were definitely stronger now. "It's almost like it's trying to communicate," said Dr. Park Hyojin, the station's xenolinguist. She had been studying the moving symbols. "These patterns remind me of mathematical sequences, but they're more complex than anything I've seen." SEO activated the station's most powerful scanners. "Let's see what this thing is made of." The moment the scanning beam touched the artifact, everything went wrong. The sphere began to glow with brilliant white light. The symbols on its surface moved faster, spinning around like a whirlpool. The energy readings jumped off the scale, and reality began to crack. "Shut it down!" SEO shouted. "I can't," Lim replied, frantically working at her controls. "It's not responding to anything." The air around the artifact began to shimmer and twist. Small tears appeared in space itself, showing glimpses of somewhere else, somewhere dark and hungry. Through the tears came things that shouldn't exist. The first one emerged like liquid shadow, flowing out of a crack in reality and taking shape on the laboratory floor. It looked like a mixture of darkness and starlight, constantly shifting between different forms. Where it touched the floor, the metal began to dissolve. "Security to Lab 1, SEO called into his communicator. "We have a containment breach." More shadows poured through the growing cracks. They moved toward the research team with purpose, reaching out with tendrils that seemed to be made of hungry void. Dr. Park screamed as one of the shadows touched her. But instead of being hurt physically, her eyes went blank and she stopped moving. The shadow seemed to be feeding on something inside her mind. "Run!" SEO grabbed Lim's arm and pulled her toward the exit. They made it to the corridor just as the station's security team arrived. The guards were trained professionals, equipped with the latest energy weapons. They should have been able to handle any threat. "Contact with hostile entities," reported Security Chief Wang Dongmin over the communication system. Weapons aren't working." The energy beams passed right through the shadow creatures without effect. Plasma charges, explosive rounds, even electromagnetic pulses did nothing. The shadows kept coming, reaching for the minds of everyone they encountered. "All hands abandon ship," Captain Oh Hyun-sik's voice echoed through the station. "This is not a drill. Proceed to emergency pods immediately." CO and Lim ran through corridors filled with panicking crew members. Behind them, The shadows spread through the station like an infection. Anyone they touched became still and empty, their consciousness absorbed into the growing darkness. They reached the escape pod bay to find chaos. Half the pods had already launched. Captain O was helping the remaining crew into the last few pods. "Dr. Seo," O called out. "What happened down there?" "We activated something we shouldn't have," Seo replied breathlessly. "These things, they're not from our dimension, they feed on minds." A shadow emerged from the corridor behind them. Security Chief Wang stood in its path, firing his weapon until the power pack was empty. When that failed, he tried to fight it with his bare hands. The shadow flowed around him like water, and Wang's eyes went blank. "Move." Captain O shoved Seo and Lim into a pod and slammed the hatch shut. As their pod ejected from the station, they could see through the small window what was happening to Far Horizon. The entire structure was covered in creeping darkness. Reality itself seemed to be breaking apart around it, with more cracks opening and more shadows pouring through. "Emergency beacon is active," Lim reported from the pod's control panel. "Help should arrive in 6 hours." But Seo was watching the growing tears in space around the station. "I don't think 6 hours is going to matter." The shadows weren't just consuming the research station. They were using it as an anchor point, widening the cracks between dimensions. Through the largest tear, Seo could see something that made his mind hurt to process. A vast intelligence made of pure hunger waiting on the other side. "We need to warn everyone," he said. "Send a priority message to Earth, to the Galactic Council, to anyone who will listen. Tell them the endless swarm is real, and we just let them in." 24 hours later, patrol vessel Dauntless arrived at the coordinates where Far Horizon should have been. Captain O's pod and 2 others were floating in empty space. The research station was gone. The planet below was gone. Even the star seemed dimmer than it should have been. Captain O was brought aboard Dauntless, barely alive. His report was classified immediately and sent to the highest levels of Galactic Command. But by then, it was too late. The cracks in reality had spread. Reports came in from 3 other systems of strange disappearances and impossible phenomena. Ships that investigated these areas either came back with crews in catatonic states or didn't come back at all. Admiral Kang Jae-sung commanded the first official fleet sent to investigate. 50 ships, representing the best military technology the galaxy had to offer. They approached what had once been the Mordani homeworld with weapons ready and shields raised. They found something that defied understanding. Space itself was infected. Dark tendrils stretched between empty planets, pulsing with malevolent life. And from the shadows came ships that weren't ships, creatures that weren't creatures, attacks that targeted the mind instead of the body. "All ships maintain formation," Admiral Kang ordered. "Standard attack pattern 7. The hegemony ships moved into perfect battle formation, just as they had been trained. Their weapons charged with military precision. They followed their battle plans exactly. It made them perfect targets. The endless swarm had learned about galactic military tactics by consuming the minds of Far Horizon's crew. They knew how disciplined warriors would move, how they would think, how they would react. The shadow entities flowed around the fleet's formation like water around stones. Within minutes, 30 ships had crews that stared blankly at their control panels. The entities were inside their minds, learning everything about galactic civilization from the inside. "Break formation," Admiral Kang shouted. "All ships, evasive maneuvers." But military training ran deep. Even in panic, the crews tried to follow proper procedures. They moved in predictable patterns, making logical decisions, fighting the way they had been taught. The swarm consumed them all. Only one ship escaped that first battle. A small human patrol vessel called Lucky Star, commanded by Lieutenant Kim Bora. She had watched the main fleet get destroyed and made a decision that saved her life. "All crew, listen carefully," she announced on the ship's intercom. "Forget everything you learned in the academy. We're going to fly the ship like we stole it." Lucky Star began moving in ways that made no tactical sense. Kim ordered random course changes, pointless loops, and maneuvers that served no purpose. Except to be unpredictable, it worked. The swarm entities couldn't predict where Lucky Star would go next because the crew had no plan. They couldn't read minds that weren't thinking in logical patterns. Lucky Saint. Supreme Commander Park Soman stood on the bridge of the flagship Indomitable, watching the largest space battle in galactic history unfold before her. She had come a long way from being a simple military attaché mocked by alien counselors. Now she commanded fleets from 800 different species, all fighting for their very existence. The endless swarm had reached the core systems. Their main force was a writhing mass of shadow and hunger that stretched across 3 star systems. Traditional sensors couldn't even count how many entities were in the swarm, because they existed partially outside normal space. Fleet Admiral Kim, report, Park spoke into her communicator. Fleet Admiral Kim Min-soo's voice crackled back from the front lines. Commander, we've engaged the enemy across 17 sectors. Initial casualty reports are confusing. Explain confusing. The crews that follow human tactics are surviving at an 80% rate. Everyone else is dead or worse. The alien commanders are struggling to adapt to our methods. Park wasn't surprised. Teaching proud warrior species to fight like chaotic humans had been the hardest part of the war preparation. Many alien crews simply couldn't break their training enough to be truly unpredictable. Dr. Yoon, status on the dimensional weapon? Park asked. Dr. Yoon Ji-won looked up from her science station, her face pale with exhaustion. We've confirmed the theory, Commander. The swarm entities exist by anchoring themselves to consumed consciousness. If we can disrupt that anchor, the rifts between dimensions will close, Park finished. How do we disrupt something made of pure thought? We overwhelm it with something the swarm can't process, something completely alien to their nature. Which is? Dr. Yoon smiled grimly. Hope. Pure, irrational, impossible hope. The kind only humans seem to generate naturally. On the front lines, the battle raged across dozens of worlds. The swarm moved like a plague, consuming everything in its path. But wherever human commanders led the defense, impossible things happened. Captain, Lee Jae-hoon's squadron was trapped in the Vega system with no reinforcements and failing shields. Any logical commander would have retreated. Instead, Lee ordered his ships to fly directly into the center of the enemy formation. All ships, maximum power to engines, he commanded. We're going to ram right through them. Sir, that's suicide, his tactical officer protested. Exactly. Lee grinned. They'll never see it coming. The 12 ships accelerated into the heart of the swarm. Shadow entities reached out to consume their minds but found something they couldn't process. The human crews were terrified but determined, facing certain death with jokes and songs and memories of home. The swarm entities recoiled from minds filled with such chaotic emotion. In that moment of confusion, Lee's ships broke through and escaped to fight another day. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Human crews did impossible things because they believed impossible things were possible. They fought hopeless battles with absolute certainty that they would somehow win. But the cost was growing. For every success, a dozen ships were lost. The swarm was learning, adapting, consuming more minds and growing stronger. Supreme Commander Park made the hardest decision of her life. All units fall back to the Sol system. We're going to make our final stand at Earth. The retreat was orderly but heartbreaking. Millions of beings from hundreds of worlds fled toward humanity's home system. Behind them, the swarm consumed entire civilizations. In Earth's orbit, the greatest fleet ever assembled prepared for the last battle. Ships from every species in the galaxy floated in formations that looked like abstract art. Human tactical doctrine had evolved beyond all recognition, becoming something closer to improvised jazz than military strategy. Dr. Yoon, Park called out, tell me you have good news about the dimensional weapon. I have news, Commander. Whether it's good or not depends on your definition of acceptable losses. Dr. Yoon activated the main display, showing a complex diagram of interdimensional physics. We can close the rifts, but it requires a massive surge of consciousness-based energy. Someone has to fly directly into the main dimensional gateway and broadcast pure human hope at maximum intensity. A suicide mission, Park realized. The pilot and crew won't survive the dimensional transition, but their sacrifice could save the galaxy. Song Hae-won stepped forward from the back of the bridge. She was a young volunteer who had joined the military just months before the war began. Her psychological profile showed impossible levels of optimism and determination. "I'll do it," she said simply. "Song, you don't understand," Park protested. "This isn't just about dying in battle. The dimensional energy will tear apart your consciousness. You'll cease to exist in any form." "I understand, Commander. But if we don't try, everyone dies anyway. And honestly," Song smiled, "I think we can win this." That smile, in the face of certain death and impossible odds, was the most human thing Park had ever seen. Within hours, 10,000 volunteers had stepped forward for the mission. They came from every human ship in the fleet. Some were experienced veterans. Others were civilian engineers who had never fired a weapon. What they all shared was the absolute belief that their sacrifice would matter. "We can't take everyone," Park announced to the assembled volunteers. "But we can take enough." The final assault force consisted of 1,000 ships piloted by humans who knew they would never come home. They painted messages on their hulls, sang songs over the communication channels, and shared photos of families they would never see again. As they prepared for launch, Elder Vorthak appeared one last time in the Fleet Command Center. "I wanted to see this moment," he said to Park. "My species has fought the swarm for millions of years. We always failed because we tried to be logical about it. You humans have the greatest weapon in the universe." "What weapon?" Park asked. "You fight harder when you're losing. You become more determined when things seem hopeless. You find ways to laugh in the face of death itself. That is why you will succeed where we failed." The volunteer fleet launched toward the dimensional gateway at the heart of the swarm. They flew in formations that looked like flowers, like dancing figures, like children's drawings come to life. There was no military logic to their movements, only pure creative chaos. The swarm entities swarmed around them, trying to consume their minds. But what they found was something beyond their comprehension. The human volunteers were not thinking about tactics or survival. They were thinking about home, about love, about hope for a future they would never see. Song Hae-won's voice echoed across all communication channels as her ship approached the dimensional rift. "This is volunteer leader Song to all ships. Remember, we're not dying today. We're living forever. Our hope will outlast the stars themselves." Her ship, followed by 999 others, plunged into the dimensional gateway. The energy released was visible. Across 3 star systems, a burst of pure human consciousness that the swarm could not digest or deflect. The effect was immediate and devastating to the enemy. Dimensional rifts began collapsing across the galaxy. Shadow entities found themselves cut off from their source of power. The vast intelligence that directed the swarm shrieked in frequencies that shattered glass on ships light years away. Within hours, the endless swarm was gone. Not destroyed, but banished back to whatever dark dimension had spawned them. The galaxy was safe. The victory celebration lasted for weeks, but it was tinged with sorrow for the volunteers who had made it possible. Their names were carved into monuments on every world in the galaxy. 6 months later, Ambassador Lee Dong-ho stood before the rebuilt Galactic Council as its newly elected chancellor. The same chamber where humans had once been mocked now rang with applause as he spoke. "Elder Vorthak spoke the truth," Lee said. "Humans are unstoppable. Not because we're the strongest or the smartest, but because we never stop believing that impossible things are possible. We never give up hope even when hope seems foolish." In the rebuilt human section, Captain Park So-min sat with her promotion papers, making her the first human Grand Admiral in galactic history. Next to her, Dr. Yoon worked on plans for a new academy where all species could learn human thinking. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the strangest source. Chaos could defeat order, hope could overcome despair, and the species everyone had dismissed as weak and illogical had saved them all. Counselor Rixtal, now a close ally of Earth, stood to address the assembly. The hegemony formally proposes a new council doctrine. "In any crisis where logic fails, we turn to the humans. They specialize in succeeding where success should be impossible. The motion passed unanimously. Elder Vorthak watched from the observation gallery, his ancient eyes bright with something that might have been pride. The galaxy was safe, and the youngest species had become its greatest protectors. But in the depths of space, monitoring stations watched for any signs of dimensional disturbance. Because if the endless swarm ever returned, the galaxy would be ready. They had learned the most important lesson of all: never underestimate the power of impossible hope. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in recorded history. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the great chamber of Nexus Prime, but their usual confidence was gone. Fear hung in the air like smoke. President Bae-Su Jin of Earth stood at the central podium, waiting for permission to speak. The humans had requested this emergency session after Lucky Star brought back news of the swarm's arrival. Most council members had ignored the request for weeks, but now they had no choice but to listen. "The chair recognizes President Bae of Earth," announced the council speaker, his multiple heads looking tired and worried. "Honored delegates," Bae began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "3 weeks ago you laughed when Elder Vorthak warned us about the endless swarm. Today 17 star systems have gone dark, 47 ships have disappeared, and our greatest military minds have no idea how to fight this enemy." Councillor Rixtal, leader of the hegemony faction, stood up from his platform. His usual arrogance was replaced by desperation. "President Bae, we acknowledge that Earth's warnings about the threat were accurate. The hegemony navy has lost 60% of its strength in 3 encounters with these entities. We need solutions, not blame." "The solution is simple," Bae replied. "Stop fighting like soldiers and start fighting like humans." Confused murmurs filled the chamber. The Crystalline Coalition representative chimed in with her bell-like voice. "What do you mean by that?" Bae activated a holographic display showing battle footage from Lucky Star's encounter. Lieutenant Kim Bora's ship survived because she abandoned military doctrine. She fought in ways that made no tactical sense. The swarm couldn't predict her moves because she had no strategy at all. "That's not warfare," protested General Vextar of the Warrior Caste Alliance. "That's chaos. You cannot win battles with random actions." "You're right," Bae agreed. "You cannot win battles that way, but you can survive them. And survival is the first step to victory." On the galaxy's outer rim, Field Marshal Ro Kyung-min was learning exactly what President Bae meant. His human rapid response force had arrived at the Kepler system, just as the swarm attacked the hegemony stronghold there. The scene was horrifying. Massive hegemony battleships floated dead in space, their crews staring blankly at nothing. Shadow entities moved between the ships like hungry ghosts, searching for more minds to consume. "All ships, ignore standard formations," Ro ordered. "Spread out randomly, move like you're drunk, fire at anything that feels wrong." His captains hesitated. Everything in their training told them this was madness. "Sir," reported Captain Yoon Sang-ho from the destroyer Defiant, "this goes against every principle of naval warfare." "Good," Ro replied. "The enemy has studied every principle of naval warfare. They learned it all from the minds they consumed. Be unprincipled. Be illogical. Be human." The small human fleet scattered across the battlefield in patterns that looked completely random. Some ships flew backward while shooting forward. Others spun in circles while their crews took turns at different stations. One ship's captain ordered his crew to pilot the vessel with their eyes closed, using only sensor data and gut instinct. The swarm entities were confused. They had adapted to counter-disciplined military tactics, but these humans weren't following any tactics at all. When shadows reached out to consume their minds, they found thoughts that jumped randomly from topic to topic. "Defiant to all ships," Captain Yoon announced. "I'm going to try something stupid." He aimed his destroyer directly at the largest shadow entity and accelerated to full speed. At the last moment, he ordered his crew to think about anything except the battle. Recipe ingredients, childhood memories, old songs, embarrassing moments from school. The shadow reached into the minds of Defiant's crew and found chaos. Instead of military planning, it absorbed random thoughts about spicy noodles and first dates. The entity recoiled, unable to process the mental disorder. Defiant fired every weapon it had at point-blank range. The shadow entity, caught off guard by the completely irrational attack, was destroyed. "It worked," Yoon shouted over the communications channel. "The key is to not think like warriors." Back on Nexus Prime, President Bay was addressing the growing panic in the council chamber. More reports arrived every hour. The fortress world of Titan's Gate had fallen. The hegemony's proudest fleet was gone. Even the ancient crystalline coalition was losing systems to the advancing darkness. "We offer Earth full membership in the Galactic Defense Command," Rixtal announced, his voice breaking with desperation. "We need your unconventional methods." "With respect, Counselor," Bay replied, "it's too late for that. The Swarm has already learned how your best armies think. They've consumed the tactical knowledge of dozens of species. Traditional military command will only help them predict our moves." "Then what do you propose?" demanded the speaker. "Put humans in charge of everything." The chamber erupted in shocked protests. The idea of humans commanding galactic military forces was unthinkable. They were a minor species with a tiny fleet and no significant victories. "Impossible," declared General Vextar. "The warrior castes have commanded galactic defenses for 10,000 years. We will not hand control to primitives." Elder Vorthak materialized in the chamber without warning. His ancient presence silenced the protests immediately. "You will hand control to the humans," he said quietly, "or you will all die. The choice is simple." "Elder," Rixtal pleaded, "surely there must be another way, some weapon, some tactic." "I have seen this enemy before," Vorthak replied. "They consumed my homeworld 60,000 years ago. I survived only because I learned to think like a human. Chaotic, illogical, unpredictable. It is the only defense against beings that devour logical thought." Reports continued to stream in from the outer systems. Colonel An Bora's unconventional warfare units had saved 3 worlds by using tactics that military academies would consider insane. Her troops painted their armor in bright colors to confuse enemy targeting. They sang songs while fighting. They made decisions by flipping coins. Every time they acted illogically, they won. Every time they followed proper military doctrine, they died. "The hegemony formally requests that Earth take command of all galactic defense forces," Rixtal announced, his pride finally broken. One by one, other factions followed. The warrior castes, the Trade Federation, even the proud crystalline coalition, voted to put humans in charge of the war effort. President Bay accepted with a heavy heart. "We'll do our best," she said, "but understand that our methods will seem wrong to you. We're going to fight this war in ways that make no sense." "As long as you fight it successfully," Rixtal replied. The emergency session ended with humanity, in command of forces 1,000 times larger than their own fleet. But the real test was still coming. Deep space sensors showed massive distortions approaching the core systems. The main swarm force was still hours away. As delegates filed out of the chamber, Elder Vorthak approached President Bay. "You understand the burden you have accepted," he said. "We understand that everyone is counting on us," Bay replied. "We won't let them down." "That attitude," Vorthak observed, "is exactly why you might succeed. Any logical species would surrender in the face of such odds. Humans will fight hopeless battles and somehow find ways to win them." On the command deck of his flagship, Field, Marshal Rowe received word of his promotion to Supreme Commander of Galactic Defense Forces. He looked at the data streams showing the approaching swarm and made a decision that would have gotten him court-martialed in any other war. "All ships, all species," he broadcast on the emergency frequency. "New standing orders. Forget your training. Ignore your instincts. Fight like lunatics. The galaxy's survival depends on it." Across known space, military commanders struggled to understand how chaos could be a strategy, but the humans were about to show them that sometimes the only way to win an impossible war was to fight it in impossible ways.